Hello, this is Gallifreyan Jedi speaking, and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. And for this month's blog, the month of November, it will be on the topic of Doctor Who Mythology number 3, Skaro and the Daleks. And to give everyone a little heads up before we jump into our topic, my outline notes I've divided up to two parts. Skaro is going to be the first part, and the second part is the origin of the Daleks. So some of the information, the reason is because I'm going to cover some of the history of Skaro, along with delving deeper, more into it, with the origin of the Daleks, specifically. It might appear that I'm being repetitive, but I'm not. Some of the material is overlapping one another, and there's a purpose, there's a method to my madness. But essentially I want to keep everybody up, informed on that, and also too, hopefully, as you watch my video, it will be coherent. It'll all flow together ultimately and be coherent message. But anyway, without any further ado, let's jump in. Let's start off, like I said, we're going to start off with Skaro, the planet Skaro, which is the home of the Daleks. Most Doctor Who fans who have followed the series know that when you hear Skaro, we know that it's the planet of the Daleks, the origin of the Daleks. But anyway, let's jump in, talking about the astronomical data. Okay, Skaro was the home planet of two humanoid species. Now, when I say humanoid species, what I mean is very similar to humans on Earth, but their own distinctive alien DNA. Very much like what I've described in Star Wars mythology about humans and then the near humans, like the chess and stuff like that. Well, the two humanoid species, which I'm about to announce in a second, are very similar to that same kind of concept. But anyway, the two humanoid species I'm referring to are the Kaleds and the Thals. Okay, the planet was devastated by a 1,000-year war, where the surface of the planet became permanently scarred and disfigured, where it became an inhospitable world, and it was plagued with hordes of mutant creatures. And it was at this time, during this conflict, that a Kaled scientist known as Davros created the Daleks. Now I'm going to be going deeper in a little bit with the history of Skaro, but more so with the origin of the Daleks. Davros is going to be one of our main figures for this video blog. But anyway, moving on. Skaro was, okay, the location, shall we say, that we're getting down, with astronomical issues or astronomical data. Skaro was located in what is known as the 7th galaxy. Now, I don't know, I have to be upfront and honest, I do not know if the 7th galaxy is referring to another galaxy outside of the Milky Way galaxy, or if Skaro is within a section of the Milky Way galaxy, which is referred to as the 7th galaxy. Don't know too much. Don't know that. Unlike Gallifrey, my last Doctor Who blog, which I discussed that Gallifrey more is written and known about Gallifrey being within the Milky Way galaxy, but at a different section from where Earth is at. So anyway, let's move on. It used to have a similar atmosphere, climate, and gravity to Earth, though it was plagued by sulfuric rain caused by the 1,000-year war, which made the atmosphere very inhospitable. Skaro was the 12th planet from its sun. It's interesting, the location. You deal with the star system, you're dealing with a star system of planets. Like we have our star system is Sol, and Earth is the 3rd planet in that star system. So Skaro was the 12th planet in its star system, as well as the nearest neighbor was a planet called Vega, if I'm pronouncing that right. The landscape, let's talk about the landscape. On the surface of Skaro had a single large continent in which the Kaleds and Thals evolved. This continent was divided into two parts by an immense mountain range. So essentially, it was one continent, but the divide between the land of the Thals and the land of the Kaleds was not divided by a sea or an ocean. It was divided by a series of mountains. so it's interesting. A jungle once grew near the Dalek city, which followed an exchange of neutron bombs, whereby the jungle was made petrified at that point. Most of Skaro was a wasteland, devoid of all life after centuries of war. Radiation levels across most of the planet remained high. There was less irradiated plateaus where the Thals lived. Where the Thals learned to live, was a place where there was less radiation than sort of where the Kaleds had lived. But anyway, moving on. Hydrothermal activity was indicated by the presence of certain places like the names of the geyser swamp, quote unquote, called the geyser swamp. However, all bodies of liquid may not have been composed of water. At least one river was known to comprise sulfuric acid. That's probably due to the war, the 1,000-year war, that river became sulfuric acid. And the geysers in the geyser swamp spewed mercury rather than steam. And mercury, of course, and I think that's probably, maybe some of that is due to the war too. But it didn't blow steam, it blew mercury, and mercury is lethal to humanoid life forms. But anyway, moving on, the planet was known to have polar ice caps. The mountains at one of the poles were known as the polar mountains. Hopefully, I didn't confuse you there. But anyway, moving on. Still talking about the landscape. We're going to talk about the. Actually, no. We're moving on to native life. Okay, all life on the planet Skaro had a fundamental type of DNA, which was known as 467989. That's what it essentially boiled down to on the Wikipedia site, on the Doctor Who Wikipedia site. I don't know what that means, those numbers mean, but that's their own distinctive DNA. Most of Skaro's animals and plant life became extinct as a result of the atomic war during the 1,000-year war. Some of the survivors, including the Varga plants and Slithiers, if I'm pronouncing that right. The Lake of Mutations was home to a variety of life forms, including the Terracorn, and at least one of the planet was inhabited by a large dinosaur-like creature. Interesting enough. Another Skarosian life form were the Magnodons. Most perished in the war, leaving the landscape littered with their metallic exoskeletons. But finishing up with that, so several sentient species evolved on Skaro, including the sentient species, humanoid species. There was 4 of them, including the Thals, the Tharons, the Kaleds, the Thals, Tharons, Kaleds, and Thals. Excuse me, I don't want to confuse anybody by similar names, but by the time of the 1,000-year war, the Tharons and the Thals had died out, which makes sense, because if you look at any of the classic Doctor Who series, or even the new Doctor Who series, you're only dealing with the Thals and the Kaleds. So they're the 2 humanoid species that became dominant, still survived the 1,000-year war, but were still there on Skaro afterwards. So, centuries prior, the Tharons and Thals had died out; they became extinct. The Mutos were mutated Kaleds and Thals. So when you hear, especially in the classic series, Genesis of the Daleks, you'll hear them refer to Mutos, when Mutos are mutants of Kaleds and Thals, both Kaleds and Thals. Yeah, excuse me. Let's deal with the pre-war history of Skaro. It says on the planet Skaro, approximately 10 million years prior to the 1,000-year war, the Kaleds diverged from the Thals. So it seems like that the Kaleds and the Thals were one species or one race or one nation, beings of people, community of people, and through their social, even somewhat biological evolution, they became 2. The Kaleds, they used to all be known as the Thals, but the Kaleds came from the Thals, so they split off and became the Kaleds. Let's deal now, too. creation of the Daleks in ancient Skaro's history. By the time of the creation of the cyborgs known as the Daleks, the Kaleds and the Thals had fought the Thousand-Year War over the wasteland adjacent to the Kaled Dome. And we get that from the genesis of the Daleks. When Davros, now interesting enough, I'm including something here. Most of my blogs majority of my blogs, Doctor Who blogs, essentially deal with the classic Doctor Who series. And I touch a little bit on, once in a while, the new series, but not as much. Most of my information is coming from the classic Doctor Who series because, like I said, that's still my favorite. But I do, once in a while, bring in the new material from the new series. And this is one of those things from the new series, from the opening, actually, of this current Series 9 of the new Doctor Who series. But anyway, let me go on with the information. So when Davros was a young child, running for his life during the battle in the Thousand-Year War, the 12th Doctor passed Davros, he passed him his own sonic screwdriver to speak to him across the minefield of hand mines. Remember, the hand mines were, if you've seen it, they look like hands with eyeballs in them. And I don't know, must have been some kind of wacky technology of the Kaleds and the Thals during that time, during the Thousand-Year War. But what it would do is there would be like 100 of them that would just pop up, just like a normal minefield. And if you got near one of them, they would grab you and pull you underground. And I assume that would mean that they would kill, and it would end up killing you. But anyway, okay. So basically, the Doctor throws Davros his sonic screwdriver so he can speak to him and help him out of the minefield of hand mines. Not realizing whom the young boy was until he told the Doctor that his name was Davros. The Doctor reconsidered helping Davros get out of the minefield and left him in the minefield. Later, a future version of the 12th Doctor arrived on Skaro and pointed a Dalek gun stick at Davros in an attempt to save his friend. And he quote, "the only way I can." And he then proceeded to destroy the hand mines and save Davros to teach him the concept of mercy before taking him home. That's what you have to watch that two-part episode to understand what was going on in that scene. You know, the Doctor originally, when he found out that the child was Davros, that shocked him to no end, and he just booked it out of there, got his hardest and left. But during the two-part, when he had to meet Davros in his later years, he found out that one of the Daleks did have a concept of mercy. And he knew that in order to save his companions, Missy, who is now the modern version of the Master, and also his companion, and also Clara, his companion, Clara Oswald. In order to save her, he had to go back and save Davros from that minefield. And somehow a little bit of the concept of mercy was able to be put inside of a Dalek during the creation. But I'll leave it for you to watch that two-part episode in Series 9, to understand more of what's going on in that story. But I found that to be a very fascinating story. But anyway, moving on, during the Thousand-Year War, technology had devolved on Skaro. The Kaleds were a strict militaristic society that was governed by the scientific elite. Now, keep in mind that when we're dealing with the Kaleds, especially during the Thousand-Year War, Terry Nation, who was the creator of the Daleks originally back with the first Doctor when they were first introduced to the Doctor Who series, which was actually the second story of the first season of Doctor Who. Terry Nation built the concept of Daleks around the Nazi empire, around the Nazis, just filled with hate, no compassion, and just an overwhelming consuming, not only of hate, but a consuming quest to rid the galaxy, exterminate all life forms that are not Dalek, so they can rule the universe with no one else that's different than them. well, when they did the classic Doctor Who story, which was in the first season of Tom Baker, Genesis of the Daleks, they had the Kaleds. And you can clearly see that they built the Kaleds since they were a militaristic society and they were governed by scientific elite, that essentially the Kaleds were patterned in that war after Nazi Germany, very clearly, which I'm going to get to in a second when I'm talking about Davros. But anyway, let me move on. It says, by this phase of the war, biological nuclear weapons had begun to cause mutations known as the mutos. So remember I talked about the mutos before, or a combination between the Thals and the mutations, horrible mutations between the Thals and the Kaleds, known as the mutos. Well, obviously it's the biological and the nuclear weapons, radiation and biological chemical weapons that caused these humanoids to become the mutos. The majority of Kaled scientists saw this as the end of their species in its, quote, pure, unquote, form. Davros, who was the Kaled's chief scientist, now I make a note here that he is patterned after Josef Mengele. If you know your history with World War II in Nazi Germany, Josef Mengele was an SS officer over the concentration camps. And he used, tragically and horribly, he used the Jewish victims that were in the concentration camps. He used them for medical experiments. I mean, which raises the level of his evil right up there with Hitler, if not more. And but basically, when they did that story, the Genesis of the Daleks, they were patterning. He was the chief. Davros was the chief scientist. He was the chief Kaled scientist. But he was built based on Josef Mengele, because essentially a lot of the things that Josef Mengele was and what he did, Davros exactly did the same, but in the fictional universe of Doctor Who and on his own planet of Skaro. And keep in mind too, which I'm not going to be talking about too much, and I've mentioned this in other blogs, but basically the Kaleds, both the Kaleds and Thals, did not, at that time, especially at that time, did not believe life was on any other planet. They believed that Skaro was the only planet in the universe that had life on it. Think of that. Imagine meeting an alien who used to think that his place and his race were the only ones. Well, we can sit there and say, there's a lot of humans that believe we're alone in the universe, human beings, that life is only here on Earth and there's no life beyond it. And I just found that an interesting concept. But anyway, Davros, decided to accelerate the mutations on purpose to determine their ultimate form. Quote, quote, ultimate form, unquote. Excuse me, I apologize. And placed the Kaled mutations in the travel machines. These creatures then became the successors of the Kaleds, the Daleks. So the Daleks were the progenitors of the Daleks were the Kaleds, because the Kaleds became the Daleks. So the mutations of the Kaleds are essentially are the Daleks. That's where the Daleks had come from. Now, interesting enough, when we get to the story of the Genesis of the Daleks with Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, this is essentially what the story was about and what happened. The Fourth Doctor was transported back. Now, keep in mind, let me back up. That was where he left his TARDIS on the space station, Derva, as it was circling, as it was rotating around the Earth, or circling, in orbit around the Earth. Excuse me. The Doctor went down without his TARDIS to fix some mechanical problems that were down on the transporter beams, and then he countered the Centauran in the Centauran experiment, which I don't want to go into detail with that story. You have to watch it on your own. But then when they were transporting themselves, the Doctor and his companions, Harry and Sarah Jane Smith, back to the the space station to go to the TARDIS, they were taken, but the Time Lords took them out of the space and time, snatched them from space and time, and transported them back to the time period by secret agency of the Time Lords. Now, keep in mind, when I say secret agency, remember they have the CIA. Now, it's different. The CIA is not the same as our American CIA. American CIA is Central Intelligence Agency. Well, they don't refer to the same, although in essence, they are the same, even though their acronym doesn't come out the same. Their thing, CIA, means Celestial Intervention Agency. But essentially, in essence, they're the same thing as our Central Intelligence Agency, the Time Lords. They act in secret. They're secret intelligence. And they perform secret ops missions, which is technically illegal by the High Council of the Time Lords. But that's why they keep everything secret. Because they operate somewhat above Time Lord law. They operate above. But anyway, let's go on. Okay, and the secret agent of the Time Lords asked, and was asked by the Time Lord secret agent to prevent a possible future where the Daleks would rule the universe. That was their fear. That was their fear. And interesting enough, I am surprised, really surprised, with this theme going on, that almost nobody has picked up on it. Not even the writers of the new Doctor Who series, of the Last Great Time War, and this incident back when the CIA, Time Lord CIA agency, asked the Doctor to interfere with Dalek history and change it. And I'm surprised that they didn't correlate the two, because the two seem like they fit together. The two storylines fit together. It's the Time Lords feared the Daleks would one day rule the universe. They would come to conquer the Time Lords and try to rule the universe. So they were trying to stop that before that could ever happen. The Doctor reluctantly accepted the job, and after getting involved with the politics and war between the Kaleds and the Thals, the Doctor ultimately did not destroy the creation of the Daleks. The Doctor felt that he had no right to commit genocide. And if you remember that, remember he was saying that if you met a child and you knew the child was going to grow up to do all these horrible things, but there's still, right now, as he's a child, do you have the right? Do we have the right to kill him? That's what he was struggling. Moving on from that, like I said, he didn't have the. The Doctor felt that he didn't have the right to commit genocide, or change the timeline for that matter. And he also felt that with all the evil of the Daleks, now this is important. This is how he rationalized his judgment on it. And he also felt that all the evil that the Daleks do down through history, that there has been some good that came out of it. For many worlds that would naturally be enemies with each other, they formed alliances over their fear of the Daleks. And although ironically, okay, let me back up. So in essence, the Doctor knew that even through the horrible things, a lot of times, I'm trying to remember. I apologize for forgetting what game they had, but they had a game, and this reminded me, saying, if we had the power to go back and kill Hitler when he was a child or an infant, and stop Nazi Germany from ever forming, wouldn't that be attractive? Wouldn't you seriously contemplate doing that? Well, the problem is that a lot of times, no matter how horrible something is, we don't know what the alternative history would be. And there was this game, and I'm sure I'm going to get some comments. People are going to comment to remind me what the name of the game was, because I can't think of it right now, where he had this alien Einstein, and you had this Einstein person. He went back in time, killed Hitler. All of a sudden, the whole Western civilization was changed. Modern 20th century Western civilization was changed. So Nazi Germany never came to power. But what ultimately happened is that the Soviets were able then to jump in and become the aggressors of Europe. And I find that kind of scenario very, very interesting, trying to, guessing and trying to change history, not knowing the damage that you could do. But essentially, the Doctor felt that even though all the horrible evil the Daleks do, some good has come out of it. And if he had stopped or eliminated the Daleks before they ever got started, you don't know what the consequences would be, because there was many planets, many worlds, and empires and civilizations that would have been at war, but they formed alliances. So there was good that has come out of the existence of the Daleks, ironically. That's just the way the universe works. And of course, as a Christian, I believe that God preordains things so good will come out of evil when evil does happen. But anyway, moving on. Although ironically, the Doctor did play a part in entombing the Daleks in the Kaled bunker. That's what happened at the end. But the Daleks still survived and promised to reemerge, which I'm going to touch a little bit on that a little bit later in this blog. Okay, let's deal with the aftermath. The aftermath of the war and the creation of the Daleks. Centuries had passed on Skaro. Radiation levels had dropped, though they still presented much danger to both humans and Gallifreyan life. Well, obviously we're talking about the Doctor and his companions. The Thals believed that they were now intellectually and physical perfection, and they lived in a simple, pastoral, and pacifist lifestyle. Thals never ventured into Dalek City near the petrified forest or showed any curiosity about it. Because of their dependency on the static electricity to move about, the Daleks stayed within the city. So that's why they never, at that time, we're dealing with centuries had passed, and basically they're in evolution. The Kaleds ultimately became the Daleks, but their present technology at the time only trapped them, they needed an electrical floor to move about. They couldn't move about, they couldn't fly, they couldn't, do a lot of things that you see them do in the new series, but they still were trapped in that city. But centuries had passed and they had evolved differently. The Kaleds obviously evolved into the Daleks. All of them were Daleks, the Kaleds, so there was no humanoid or humanoid Kaled left. All of them had become mutated into the Dalek form, and the Thals evolved into their thing. Now keep in mind, with the Thals were even though that the Kaleds during the 1,000-Year War were very much like Nazi Germany, the Thals were no different. They were, well, I should say they were different, but they were still very brutal, and the war hardened them and made them almost merciless at times. If you have to watch Genesis of the Daleks to know what I'm talking about, because it's the way they were like. But the Thals later, centuries later, became very much almost like what you would consider like the Amish community. A pastoral, lived a very simple lifestyle, and they were pacifists. They did not, at the time, and I'm speaking about centuries later, the Thals did not believe in warfare, in engaging in warfare. They believed that everything could be achieved through peace. Now, this is where we come, the state that the Thals and the Kaleds, or shall we say the Daleks are. This is the state where the first Doctor shows up on Skaro. And it's interesting, as you're dealing with time, you deal with the fourth Doctor, he goes back and he deals with ancient Skaro. So you get more into modern Skaro, that's where the first Doctor, but see, this is where time travel gets very confusing, because your future self finds out more stuff by traveling further back in the past, where your present self, your past or your present, whatever one you want to refer to, is visiting a place that your future self will know more about because he traveled further back into the past. And this was happening in the Daleks, the second serialized story of the First Doctor. And it says the First Doctor landed the TARDIS on Skaro, not knowing any of the planet's dangers. Ironically, the Daleks' discovery of the Doctor and his companions, who came from off-world, caused him to wonder about and to fear the existence of other sentient life on Skaro. The Doctor's companion, Ian Chesterton, taught the Thals to use violence in self-defense in order to protect themselves against the xenophobic Daleks who threatened them. During this time, the Daleks came to know that they needed high radiation to live. With levels subsiding and their lives threatened, the Daleks proposed to set off another neutron bomb. As this would take too long, the Daleks instead planned to release radiation from nuclear reactors into the atmosphere. Not a good sign. That's definitely not a good thing. And a combined effort by the Doctor and his companion, as well as the Thals, resulting in the electricity supply for the city being cut off, leaving Daleks immobile and powerless. So that's how they defeated the Daleks back then during what became the modern period in Skaro's history. So, but the Daleks evolved. I mean, if you've seen Genesis of the Daleks, there was a scene where the Davros finds out from the Doctor that he's encountered the Daleks before from the future, and he records and forces him. What's the word I'm looking for? Duress. Under duress, he forces the Doctor under duress to reveal how he defeated the Daleks every single time. And what he was planning to do, Davros was planning to do, is that he recorded those conversations, and he was planning to use that information to plan it on the Daleks in the past, so they would be able to know what was coming and be able to countermand that what the Doctor was going to do. But fortunately, before the Doctor left, he was able to get his hands on the recorded material which he gave, the information that he gave to Davros, and destroy it, so the Daleks are back to square one. Time has not changed, shall we say, from that. Moving on, the spaceflight era, and this is the future. This is not the present. This is beyond the future, beyond that time the First Doctor encountered the Thals and the Daleks. Now we're dealing with the futures. By the 26th century, it appears that the Thals had reclaimed Skaro from the Daleks. You see the John Pertwee, the Third Doctor story. He encounters the Thals and Daleks. So basically, I guess that was effective. Ian Chesterton taught them is to fight for self-defense, for their own survival, and they maintained that knowledge and that practice even up to the 26th century, when the Doctor encountered the Thals again. And it appears, because what they said, that they reclaimed Skaro from the Daleks. In another era, in the Dalek city, the Dalek Emperor ruled an empire which spanned both space and time. That happened in the Second Doctor, The Evil of the Daleks. Patrick Troughton, it happened during Patrick Troughton's era. The story of the Evil of the Daleks, serialized story, Evil of the Daleks, that happened in. Now we're going to go on to part 2. Now keep in mind, like I said again, I'm going to repeat myself, that some of the material I'm covering in this next section on the origin of the Daleks is overlapping some of the stuff that I've covered on the history of Skaro. So I do apologize for that. If you think that I'm not trying to annoy anyone, but I do apologize ahead of time if it does annoy anyone. But anyway, let's go on now. Origin of Daleks. We'll talk about the conceptual origins of the Daleks. On the planet Skaro, towards the end of the 1,000-Year War between the Thals and the Kaleds, both sides suffered mutations, which we discussed before, caused by nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Well, we talked about that already. Some of the mutant survivors, known as the Mutos, survived in the wastelands. Now, that you could see that in Genesis of the Daleks, because they did encounter, when they were traveling in the wasteland, they did encounter a lot of these Mutos, which we know were both made up of Kaleds and Thals. A young Kaled scientist known as Shane, authored a paper which formulated a solution to the of perpetual war or mutually assured destruction. With both Kaleds and Thals competing for resources, she claimed that the only way out of this dilemma was through a process she called, quote, the Dalek solution, unquote. Davros presented the paper to the Kaled Council as his own, though he omitted several of Shane's more controversial conclusions, such as the fact that the Kaled race would be completely replaced by the new species. Another account had it that the name Davros gave his creations came from the prophecy, and it's interesting, this is another account from sort of like a legends kind of account, that Davros gave his creations came from a prophecy found in a forbidden, quote, Book of Predictions. That was the name of it, Book of Predictions. That's that Davros was reading. Written in the extinct language of the Thals, which stated, quote, on that day men will become as gods, unquote. In the original language, the final word was pronounced Dalek. So you get a good idea of what that legend was saying, is that Davros was reading that book and that prophecy, and in their own original language, Dalek, game that men will become like gods, and that's what Davros wanted to do, is deify his creation in a way. Let's deal with the creation of the first Dalek. Later in his history, that they were talking about Davros' history, now crippled, became one of the Kaled scientific elite, patterned after Josef Mengele. He had begun experiments on living subjects and hoped to deify the Kaled race, which I had just mentioned. Davros was able to push through legislation enabling authority and ownership of all Kaled infants under the age of 5 years old to be delivered to pediatric facility K99, which he used as a laboratory for surgical experiments. So it's interesting, he went even to the young children, to the infants and the small children, and he was going to mutate them from, it's pretty evil, mutate them from that young so they would become the Dalek, part of the Dalek race. But anyway, on to Davros reveals the Daleks, the revelation of the Daleks. Now this is all happening. All this stuff is happening in the 6-part serialized Genesis of the Daleks with the Tom Baker, which is one of my favorite of the classic series. Anyway, Davros did not immediately show the results of his Dalek experiments to the Kaled scientific elite. He improved and developed the shell for the organic components of the Daleks, housing them in a tank-like and armored Mark III travel machine, similar to his own life support chair. If you see his life support chair and the Daleks, very similar model. Almost looks like the same kind of model. He maintained a nursery of embryonic Kaled young, as well as nurturing the physical form of his creations. Davros also shaped their minds. The Daleks did not understand concepts such as pity. It did not exist in their quote, vocabulary banks, unquote. Okay, the Fourth Doctor was sent on a mission by the Time Lords to prevent the creation of the Daleks in the first place, which I have discussed. I'm overlapping a little bit of information from the previous section. Or at the very least, lessen the damage they would do in the future. Basically, that's essentially what the CIA, or the Time Lord agent, the Time Lord secret agent, informed the Fourth Doctor to do. Is basically his first preference is, I'm sending you back to in time on Skaro, before the Daleks were created. I want you either to prevent their creation totally so they don't even exist, or at least slow them down or change their history so they won't become a threat to the Time Lords. Ultimately, that was what the Celestial Intervention Agency wanted the Doctor to do. But anyway, arriving on Skaro, he discovered that many other members of Kaled's scientific elite were against this project also. To prevent this, Davros arranged for the Thals to aim a missile at the Kaled dome where his people resided. So essentially, what happened is that many of the scientific elite got wind of what Davros was doing, and essentially they were opposing him, and they sent messages to their political leaders to try to, oppose him. Now this is where it gets interesting, because Davros plotting, this is almost like a spy novel, with espionage, goes to the Thals and acts like he's allied with them, and says, you need to send a missile. But it was for selfish and greedy purposes that Davros was doing that, because he knew if the Kaleds were attacked by the Thals in such a manner, then all their complaints to stop the process of the creation of the Daleks would stop. I mean, the complaints to stop that project would stop, and then Davros would have unlimited power to create those Daleks in order to deal with the threat of the Thals. That was pretty much the political plot that was going on with that. Okay, dealing with this last section. Okay, the Daleks revolt against their creator. So now Davros has, keep in mind, Davros now has this power. He's creating the Daleks from the mutants of the Kaled race, and even some from the Thals. And he thinks he has them under their power. But they're going to turn. The newly created Daleks were sent by Davros to exterminate the Thals, supposedly in retaliation for the attack on the Kaled dome. They ultimately turned on Davros, as they were not programmed to recognize any creature as superior to them, apparently killing him. So essentially, that the Daleks were so perfected in what Davros was trying to do, give them pure hate, no mercy or pity, remove all the mercy and pity, and consider themselves a supreme, almost like godlike race of the universe. And it backfired on Davros, because he thought he had control over them, but Davros was not viewed by the Daleks as another Dalek. He was viewed separate from them. So the Daleks essentially turned on him. And they apparently tried to kill him. While attempting to stop the Doctor, a Dalek triggered an explosion, which destroyed the embryo room before the Thals sealed the bunker entrance and trapped the Daleks there. In the aftermath, now keep in mind, let me finish this. In the aftermath, the Doctor believed that he had only held back their progress by 1,000 years or so, and that they would return. Davros survived his death in a state of suspended animation, and we see this take place further when Destiny of the Daleks, when the Daleks had their arch nemesis that they needed to retrieve, frozen suspended animation, Davros, in order to deal with the threat that threatened them at the time. I believe the Movilians are referred to, they were at war with. But anyway, I'm not going to go too far into that. I want to stick to this particular topic. So essentially, Davros survived his death in a state of suspended animation. The same Dalek that fired on Davros later became Dalek Prime, and eventually proclaimed himself the Dalek Emperor. So, but going back a little bit, what happened, if you remember that scene where the Doctor was contemplating, do I have a right to destroy these embryo Daleks before they became the full Daleks and did all the evil they did? Do I have that right to commit genocide? Well, while he was contemplating that and debating that, a Dalek came by and triggered something which destroyed that embryo lab, which Davros was using to convert young, infant, and small children, college children, to become Daleks. That whole laboratory was destroyed, and then when the Thals ultimately blew the bunker up and trapped those living Daleks that were still there, that turned on Davros, trapped them in there. The Doctor figured they weren't destroyed, but he did alter their history just slightly, in the sense that he slowed them down. He slowed them down a little bit by 1,000 years, but they would ultimately re-emerge. It wasn't like they were destroyed completely, which ultimately, that's what the Celestial Intervention Agency Time Lords wanted. But the Doctor sort of gave them half of what they wanted by slowing down their progress, at least. So, and the Daleks did come back. There's story arcs with the Daleks coming, the Daleks and Davros. I mean, from that point, from Genesis of Daleks, every Dalek story, I believe, especially in the classic series, not in the new series, but in the classic series, Davros was there involved in some way. Which I'm not going to go too far into the history of that because I'm pretty much ending now this one. So hopefully I've covered everything. I don't think there's anything as my mind is thinking. Hopefully I covered everything that is of significance for the topic I wanted to cover. And that was primarily about the Skaro, just talking about the history and the nature of Skaro, and then the origin of the Daleks. That's what I pretty much wanted to cover in this video blog. But in ending it, I do want to thank everyone for watching this video. For I do appreciate it more than you know, and I welcome comments, especially if they're good. But even welcoming them if they have constructive criticism. But anyway, beyond that, I'm thinking my next blog for next month in December. Remember what I said? It's going to be on the next month is going to be, because the premiere is going to nationwide release of Star Wars Episode 7: The Force Awakens. So my next blog for next month, the month of December, is going to be my review of Star Wars Episode 7: The Force Awakens. And I have to wait till I see that, so you're not going to get that at the beginning of the month. Probably at the end, towards Christmas and New Year's, you will get that blog. So stay with me and stay with my channel until I get that new blog sent out, which will be at the end of the month of December, anywhere between Christmas and New Year's. And I should have a review after I see Episode 7: The Force Awakens, which is coming out 18th. I'm going to see it on the 17th, but technically it's coming out nationwide on the 18th. So, I'll see it then, and then afterwards start working on my review for my next video blog for my YouTube channel. In ending this blog, I would like to encourage everyone, if you like the material that I produce, please subscribe to my channel, and I cherish every one of my subscribers. And also as well, I wish everybody, I wanted to bid everyone good day, to have a safe and healthy day, and may the Force be with you.